The call came at 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I always do since my wife passed, staring at the ceiling fan, counting the rotations, waiting for a sleep that never seems to come anymore. My phone lit up the nightstand, and I grabbed it before the second ring. It was my son-in-law. "There's been an accident," he said. His voice was flat. Not scared, not shaking. Just flat, the way someone sounds when they're reading from a script. Sophie collapsed. "They took her by ambulance. You should probably come." Probably. That was the word that hit me wrong. Not "please come" or "I need you here." Probably. I was in my truck before I even hung up. The drive to Mercy General is 40 minutes from my house out in Clover Creek, longer at night when the fog rolls in off the river. I drove it in 28. I kept telling myself it was a seizure, maybe low blood sugar. Sophie had always been thin, always skipping meals, always running herself ragged between her job and the kids. She was 34 years old. 34-year-olds don't just collapse, but the way he said probably kept turning over in my head the whole drive there. The ER entrance was bright and cold. I told the woman at the desk I was looking for my daughter, Sophie Whitmore. She typed something, looked up at me, and said to wait. I stood by the window with my hat in my hands for about 6 minutes before a man in scrubs came through the double doors and said my name. He was the attending physician, Dr. Callahan, mid-50s, glasses, the kind of tie that lives behind the eyes. He didn't take me to Sophie. He took me to a small room off the hallway, one of those family consultation rooms with the box of tissues on the table and the chairs that are almost comfortable. And he closed the door. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "your daughter is stable. She's going to need surgery in the morning, but right now she's stable." He paused. "Before I say anything else, I need to ask you something directly. Is your son-in-law here with you?" I said no. I came alone. He nodded, slowly, like that was the right answer. Then he looked at me for a long moment and said, "I think you should take your grandchildren and get them out of that house tonight." I didn't understand what he was saying. I actually thought I'd heard him wrong. "I'm sorry?" "Your daughter didn't collapse from exhaustion," he said. "Her lab work is showing something we don't see from natural causes. We're still running tests, but I need to be honest with you. What I'm seeing is consistent with heavy metal toxicity, the kind that builds up over time." He kept his eyes on mine, the kind that doesn't get there by accident. The room went very quiet. I remember looking down at the tissue box. I remember thinking about the Thanksgiving dinner I'd had at their house 3 weeks before, how Sophie had seemed so pale, how she'd barely touched her food, how she'd laughed it off and said she'd been fighting some kind of stomach thing for months. I'd told her to see a doctor. She'd said she had. She'd said her husband had already made the appointment. Her husband, Marcus. "Where is he now?" I asked. "In the waiting room," Dr. Callahan said. "I want to keep it that way until we know more. I don't want him to know what we found. Not yet." He leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, I have to ask, do your grandchildren live in that house full-time?" They did. Oliver was 9. Claire was 6. Sophie's kids. My kids as far as I was concerned. I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. Dr. Callahan put his hand up. "I understand, but walk slowly. Don't let him see anything on your face. Can you do that?" I'd spent 31 years as a general contractor. I'd dealt with building inspectors who wanted bribes, suppliers who cheated me blind, a business partner who embezzled from our company for 2 years before I found out. I knew how to keep my face still. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." Marcus was sitting in the waiting room in a gray fleece pullover, scrolling his phone. He looked up when I came in and did that thing he always did, that half smile, the tilt of the head, the performance of concern. "Hey, Ray, glad you made it. How is she?" "Stable," I said. "Surgery tomorrow morning. They want to monitor her overnight." I sat down 2 seats away from him, not right next to him. I couldn't trust myself that close. "I'm going to head over to the house and check on the kids," Make sure they're okay. Oh, they're fine, he said. Mrs. Petrakis next door is there. He waved his hand a little, dismissive. Still, I said, I'd feel better seeing them. He shrugged. Sure, yeah. Tell Oliver I'll be home later. I walked to my truck, sat in the driver's seat for about 30 seconds, and then I called my older daughter, Sandra, who lives in Raleigh. I told her to get in her car and drive to Sophie's house right now. Don't ask questions, just come. She started to ask anyway, and I said, Sandra, now, please. Then I drove to Sophie's house. Mrs. Petrakis was 73 and had been the neighbor for 11 years. When I knocked, she opened the door with that look older women get when they're pretending not to be worried. Both kids were asleep on the living room floor in front of the TV, which was still on. Oliver had Sophie's dark hair and her stubborn jaw. Claire was curled up with a stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. I looked at them for a long moment. Then I picked Claire up without waking her, got her settled on the couch, and covered both of them with the blanket from the back of the armchair. Mrs. Petrakis watched me from the doorway. Something's wrong, isn't it? She said. It wasn't a question. I don't know yet, I said, but I'm going to stay here tonight. She went home at 2:40. I sat in the armchair in the dark, and I tried to think clearly. Marcus Gould. I had never liked him, and I had always felt guilty about that. Sophie met him at a conference in Atlanta. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, which I always thought was a coincidence worth noting now. And they got married 14 months later. I thought it was too fast. My wife Margaret thought so too before she got sick. Marcus was handsome and quick, and he had an answer for everything, always. Charming in the specific way that starts to feel slightly off after a while, like a room where someone's moved all the furniture 2 inches to the left. Nothing you can point to. Just a feeling. I'd brought it up once, carefully, about a year into their marriage. Sophie had looked at me with that patient expression she used when she thought I was being unreasonable and said, Dad, you just miss Mom. You're projecting. Maybe she was right. I stopped saying anything, but there were things I'd noticed. Small things. The way he talked over her in conversations. The way her phone calls to me had gotten shorter, and then shorter again, until most weeks I was the one who called. The way she stopped coming to Sunday dinners, first sometimes and then almost never. The way she looked tired in every photo. Not regular tired, but the kind of tired that is really something else. I sat in that armchair and I thought about all of it. Around 4 in the morning. I went through the house. I'm not proud of it. I know you're not supposed to go through someone else's home, but that was my daughter lying in a hospital bed with metal building up in her blood. So I went through the house. I found what I was looking for in his home office in the bottom drawer of his desk, in a manila folder underneath a stack of car insurance documents. There were 2 life insurance policies on Sophie, one for $750,000 taken out 4 years ago, one for $500,000 taken out 8 months ago. Both named Marcus as sole beneficiary. Both showed Sophie's signature on the application forms. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I found something else. In the same folder, behind the insurance documents, there was a printout of a death certificate. Not Sophie's. A woman named Patricia Gould died 3 years ago. Cause of death listed as cardiac arrest. She had been 31 years old. Below that was a folded piece of paper that appeared to be a summary from a probate case. Estate of Patricia Gould, disbursed to surviving spouse Marcus T. Gould. $440,000. I sat on the floor of his office, and I held those papers, and I felt something I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't just anger. It was colder than anger. It was the feeling of something becoming clear that you already knew and didn't let yourself know. Marcus had been married before Sophie. Sophie had never mentioned that, which meant either she didn't know or she'd chosen not to tell me. I put everything back exactly as I found it. I went back to the armchair. I sat there until Oliver woke up at 7:15 and came downstairs in his pajamas and looked at me with Sophie's eyes and said, Grandpa, is Mom okay? She's okay, buddy, I said. She's going to be okay. Sandra arrived at 8. I took her out to the driveway and told her everything quietly while the kids ate breakfast inside. She stood with her arms crossed and her face absolutely still, the way Margaret used to stand when she was processing something too large for immediate reaction. "We need a lawyer," she said. "We need to get the kids out of here first," I said. "Marcus is going to come home eventually. Where are we taking them?" "My house. And then you're staying with them while I go back to the hospital." Sandra looked at me. "Dad, be careful." I was careful. I was careful in the way you are when you're 63 years old and you've already lost your wife, and you are not going to lose your daughter. Back at the hospital, I found Dr. Callahan before I found Marcus. The doctor took me aside in the corridor and told me the overnight tests had come back. The toxicology panel was showing elevated levels of arsenic. Chronic exposure. "This didn't happen in a week," he said. "This has been happening for a long time." He'd already called the police. There were 2 detectives in the building. I asked if I could see Sophie. She was awake. She looked small in the hospital bed, smaller than she'd ever looked to me. And I stood in the doorway for a second before I walked in because I didn't want her to see my face before I had it under control. I got it under control. I went in and I sat beside her and I took her hand. She was still foggy from medication. She looked at me and said, "Dad, you didn't have to come all the way out here." "Of course I did," I said. "Where's Marcus?" "He's around," I said carefully. "He's been here all night." She closed her eyes. "He's been so good to me. He drove me to every appointment. He made sure I was taking all my vitamins." Her voice trailed off. I kept my face very still. "Sophie," I said. "Before Marcus, he was married before, wasn't he? To someone named Patricia." A long pause. "How did you know that? Did he tell you about her?" "He said she died. He said it was a heart condition. He didn't like talking about it." She opened her eyes. "Dad, why are you asking me this?" I didn't answer. I just held her hand. Outside the room, I could hear footsteps in the corridor, voices, the particular sound of a hospital morning. She was looking at me. Sophie was always smart. Smarter than me in a lot of ways. Smarter than she gave herself credit for. And she was reading my face the way she used to read it when she was 12 years old, and I was trying to hide something from her. "Dad," she said. "Quieter now. What's going on?" I took a breath. I thought about the best way to say it. I thought about what Dr. Callahan had told me, and the manila folder in the desk drawer, and Patricia Gould, who died at 31 with her heart giving out. I thought about Oliver and Claire sitting at my kitchen table right now, eating cereal with Sandra, not knowing any of this. "There are some people who want to talk to you," I said. "Doctors and some other people. And I need you to tell them everything, everything he gave you, everything he told you to take, all of it. Can you do that for me?" She stared at me for a long moment. Her hands tightened around mine. "How sick am I?" she whispered. "You're going to be okay," I said. "That's the truth. But I need you to be honest with the people who are coming to talk to you. Okay?" She nodded. It took her about 4 more hours to understand the full shape of what had been happening to her. I know because I was there for part of it, and Sandra told me the rest. The detectives were good, patient, not dramatic about it, just laying out what they had and asking her questions. At some point, Dr. Callahan came in and explained the toxicology results in plain language. I watched my daughter's face move through confusion and then disbelief and then something that isn't grief exactly but is in the same neighborhood. At one point, she looked up at me and said, "I told you I wasn't just tired." I kept telling him I wasn't just tired. And I understood that she'd been gaslit about her own body for a long time, told she was anxious, told she was a hypochondriac, taken to appointments where he was present in the room so she never spoke freely. Marcus was arrested in the parking lot of the hospital at 11:43 that morning. I didn't see it happen. I was with Sophie. What came out over the following weeks was worse than I'd imagined. The investigation into Patricia Gould's death was reopened. Toxicology on her preserved tissue samples, which existed because the life insurance company had required an autopsy, something I hadn't known they did for large policies on young people, showed the same pattern. Arsenic. Long term. The investigators found a second folder at the house, one I hadn't found, in a box in the attic. It contained research, printed articles, dosing information. He'd been thorough. What it meant was that Sophie was the third. There had been a woman before Patricia, a girlfriend, never married, who'd gotten sick and recovered after they broke up, who had no idea until a detective called her out of the blue, and she sat down on her kitchen floor and stayed there for an hour. Marcus was charged with murder in the first degree for Patricia Gould and attempted murder for Sophie. The DA's office was still building the case for the third woman when I last spoke with the victim's advocate, but the prosecutor told me they were confident. Sophie had her surgery. It went well. The recovery was long, months of chelation therapy, fatigue, good days and bad days, learning to trust her own body again. Sandra and I took turns staying at my house with her and the kids. Oliver started sleeping better after about 6 weeks. Claire never really seemed to understand what had happened, which was probably a mercy. Sophie told them their dad had done something very wrong and was in trouble, and that they were safe, and that Grandpa's house was home for now. Some nights I'd sit on the back porch after the kids were in bed, looking out at the yard, and I'd try to track backward through the years to find the moment I could have said something different, done something sooner. The problem is, there wasn't a clear moment. There was just a slow accumulation of things that each looked almost normal on their own. The morning I'd gotten that call in the dock, 2:17 a.m., my daughter's husband's flat voice saying probably, that hadn't been the beginning of anything. It had been very nearly the end. By the time spring came, Sophie was well enough to take the kids to the park by herself. I watched her from the bench while Oliver chased Claire around the jungle gym, and Sophie stood with her face turned up toward the sun, just standing there breathing. She looked like herself again. She looked like Margaret, actually, the way Margaret used to stand in the backyard on a Saturday morning before everything got complicated. I thought about calling out to her. I didn't. I just watched. She turned around and saw me watching, and she smiled. That full smile she has, the one she's had since she was 3 years old. And she said, "Stop staring, Dad. You're being weird." "I'm your father," I said. "I'm allowed to be weird." She laughed. She turned back to the kids. I stayed on that bench until the sun moved and Oliver demanded someone push him on the swings, and I got up and pushed him, and Claire climbed up on the bench. I just vacated and pretended to be queen of something, and the afternoon just kept going the way afternoons do. "There are things I wish I'd done faster," said louder, insisted on harder. I think about that sometimes, late at night when the ceiling fan is turning and the sleep won't come. But I got there. That's the thing I come back to on the nights when it gets heavy. I got there in time. I keep coming back to that word. Probably. You should probably come. That was all Marcus said when he called me at 2:17 in the morning to tell me my daughter was in an ambulance. One word, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a door creaked open that I'd been holding shut for years. I think about the choices that led to that night. His and mine both. Marcus made his choices deliberately, with calculation, over a long period of time. He researched. He planned. He married a woman, then another, then my daughter, and he treated each of them like a problem to be solved for money. Every warm thing he showed the world was a performance, and underneath it was nothing but cold arithmetic. That kind of moral rot doesn't happen overnight. It's a thing a person builds, decision by decision, every time they choose what's convenient over what's right, and the weight of those choices came due. It always does. Not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense, but because people who operate that way eventually make a mistake. They get comfortable, they get sloppy, they pick the wrong doctor in the wrong hospital who happens to be thorough enough to run one extra panel of tests. Marcus's entire system depended on no one looking closely. Someone looked closely. I made my own choices that night too, and I want to be honest about them. I went through his desk. I photographed documents that weren't mine. I made decisions in the dark in someone else's house, alone, without a lawyer or a detective telling me what to do. What I had was 31 years of reading situations, bad contractors, dishonest partners, people who smile while they're stealing from you, and the specific focused clarity that comes when your child is in danger. I trusted what I knew. I moved carefully. I kept my face still in that waiting room when every part of me wanted to do something I couldn't take back. That's the thing nobody tells you about hard moments. Your whole life is the preparation. Every time you learned to think before you acted, every time you sat with something difficult instead of reacting, every time you kept going when you wanted to stop, all of it is practice for the moments when the cost of getting it wrong is someone you love. Sophie spent months rebuilding her health after everything. There were bad days. Days when the fatigue would flatten her. Days when she'd catch herself second-guessing her own memory of the marriage, asking whether she'd missed signs she should have seen. That's what prolonged manipulation does to a person. It makes you distrust your own perception. Watching her work her way back from that, slowly, steadily, refusing to let what he did define what came next, that took more strength than anything I've ever done. Oliver pushed her on the swings one afternoon in April. Claire sat on the bench, pretending to be queen of something. Sophie laughed at something Oliver said. A real laugh. Unself-conscious. The kind she used to have before the years with Marcus ground it down. I sat there, and I thought, this is what it looks like when people choose to be decent. When they choose to stay sharp enough to see what's real. When they refuse to quit. It doesn't fix everything, but it's enough to keep going.